What is going on, everybody? AJ here with Blue to Green Podcast. So, a couple things about this particular episode. One, I am announcing that I actually have an official sponsor, and that is Life is Chill, Chill Pills. I'm officially sponsored by them. And two, this episode came about because of the work I did with Chill Pill, Life is Chill, back in December, where I was the MC for the Modern Elder Expo that we had, where we talked to and educated the elder community. On that note, at that expo, I got the opportunity to meet Mr. Andrew DeAngelo. He was there writing on the expo in Forbes magazine, where he's an author for. And I struck up a conversation, had talked to him about what the podcast is, and he came on and was a very, very gracious guest. And I cannot thank him enough for giving me the time and just having the conversation and the correspondence I've had with him over the last couple of weeks. It means a lot. With that being said, for those of you who do not know, Mr. DeAngelo has been in the cannabis activism space for over 40 years. His accolades are very long. He was a co-founder of the Last Prisoner Project, who I have had on before. He helped start the California Cannabis Industry Trade Association. He's, again, spoken about convictions and everything else, and I will put a link to his bio, and it's just so much easier to go and read there. But he's been a pioneer and a staple in this community for many, many years. With that being said, he's been labeled a radical, and it was so interesting to sit down and have a almost 2-hour-long conversation with him to hear every word coming out of his mouth is the least radical, most responsible approach to cannabis that I've heard in forever. He's, like I said, he's one of the original pioneers in this space. He has a lot. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about, and has just very common sense approaches. Where I'm going with that is that, like I said, I'm always trying to bridge the gap here. It's my whole mantra. So to sit down with one of the people who has been leading this charge and leading this fight to, legalize, deschedule, but also regulate cannabis was amazing. So thank you so much to him for that time. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you get something out of it. I'm going to leave a link to his page so you can go and see exactly who he is, because I don't want to screw it up. He's too much. He's too big. He's done amazing things in this cannabis space. So again, I thank him for his time. On that note, I got to do the YouTube thing, do the whole like, comment, and subscribe thing. It helps the algorithm, helps my page, and all that stuff. So there's that little bit. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate all of my followers and listeners and viewers and all that. And I hope you enjoyed this content. Thank you very much. Peace.
Now you got it.
We are good to go. Yeah, I had to go onto the online portal, click it, and all that good stuff. So I do sincerely apologize for that oversight. That, like I said, it makes me look like an idiot, and I don't want to look like an idiot. So
no worries at all, AJ. Just
going with the flow.
Going with the flow. This happens all the time.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for coming on and having the correspondence with me. And this is amazing. This is an amazing opportunity. I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, you're absolutely welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you and your listeners today.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I hope for certain. I wanted to come on and say, and the first thing I want to say is that, like, real quick, just as a quick introduction to everybody. First of all, how you and I met is just a couple of months ago. We'll dive into who you are and all that type of stuff. You know how that goes. We met a couple of months ago at the company Life is Chill put on an expo for the elderly community. And I was the MC and kind of, the host and all that. And Life is Chill was there and a bunch of other cannabis brands here in the state of Arizona. And I was just kind of curious. I wanted to get your take on what it is that you saw in regards to that whole thing.
Well, what I saw was really important. People over the age of 50 really need education with respect to medical cannabis and all cannabis, really. And it was great to see Star and her team, putting that container together with you and Sue Sicily and Dr. William Trout and all these, the 3 patients that we met that were cancer survivors, glaucoma survivors. And just every attendee I spoke to, about 100, 150 people there, I'd say, AJ?
Roughly.
And it was valuable for every single person I talked to. So, when I wrote about it in Forbes, I think the headline was adult use cannabis often leaves patients behind. And that was sort of the thrust of the article was, this has happened, but here's some folks providing a solution to that. And so that was great to see. It was great to see enough folks still creating medical products, whether it be CBD products, CBN products, sprays, tinctures. Of course, the gummy is always popular with folks these days. Just formats that were different than inhalation formats. Almost all the seniors I talked to, that was important to them, or people over 50, I should say, not exclusively seniors. But and one of the things that's troubled me the last several years, really, since adult use came on the scene, is we're no longer people who care about making sick people well. We're now a bunch of people who want to get kids high. And we've lost the moral authority that we had for a long, long time. And we've also allowed ourselves to engage in some internal divisions that have been exploited by prohibitionists. And right there in Arizona, you've got smart approaches to marijuana collecting signatures right now to repeal adult use in Arizona. And they're also doing the same thing in Massachusetts. They're also doing the same thing in Maine. I wrote about that in Forbes just this week. And the effort in Maine, thankfully, they missed the deadline for their signatures, but they're going to keep going. And if they have to wait a year to get on the ballot, that's just fine by them. These folks have $23 million in the bank. So they're not going away anytime soon. And if we keep fighting with each other and trying to frame this medicine as something that is a party drug, and something that is not presented in a good way, in a medicinal way, in my opinion, that's going to blow back right in our faces. And we might find another wave of prohibition, if not a complete wave of prohibition, sweeping across the country in the next several years. So I was real happy to see the conference kind of reset the conversation into where it emerged from in the first place, from the patients and from cannabis as a medicine. And, clearly just from what Dr. Sue Sicily and Dr. William Trout presented at the conference, and the 3 patients we heard from who had survived horrible things using this medicine. This is medicine, folks.
Amen.
And I just think we need to get back to those roots, and particularly in more conservative states, which Arizona is sort of a much more conservative than where I'm in Northern California, but not quite as conservative as a place like Alabama, maybe,
Sure.
Sort of a light purple, or maybe a darker, or a reddish purple.
That is true.
We want to, I'm amazed at how much the stigma is still with us with respect to cannabis, all the lies that have been told. And smart approaches to marijuana, they just resurrect the same old lies. Cannabis is a gateway drug. All we care about is getting kids stoned. You're going to become impotent and not be able to have children. If you're a teenager, your brain's going to get fried and you're going to become a schizophrenic before you know it. And all these
You're hitting all the talking points.
Yeah, I mean, these are the talking points. And of course, they pull out these studies that have these big headlines. But when you dig into the studies, like there's just a study, big headline in NPR, big study on youth shows that when teenagers do weed, they have worse public health outcomes. or mental health outcomes. They studied 460,000 teenagers. All they studied was their medical records. They didn't talk to any of them. They didn't go to their homes. They didn't see what other drugs they were taking. They didn't see what other lifestyles they had. They didn't see how much social media they consume.
Right.
And still, with all of that, the most they could get was 4,000 kids out of 460,000, less than 1%. And I look at that and I'm like, that's not too bad.
That's not bad.
Compared to what this does to the mental health of a kid.
Right. Right.
Way better, right? Way better outcomes. Okay. And I'm not sure they've even measured this yet. Right. So, because how could you do that? Right. It's easy to look at the medical records of a bunch of kids that claim they smoked weed, but like how many of them are going to tell you I'm on social media 22 hours a day and it's frying my brain because I can't compete with the highlight reels that everybody else has, and it's making me depressed and anxious and makes me feel small about myself. And so, yeah, I'm going to have depression. I'm going to might develop schizophrenia, all kinds of things. Might get suicidal. So, but that's what Sam does, and that's what the press loves to eat up. For a long time, the mainstream press was all about us. It was all about the medicine. It was all about patients. It was all about this. We've been lying about this for a long time. We've been locking, especially Black and brown people, up for decades, mass incarceration, and not just incarceration, beating people up and sometimes killing them in the process of arresting them. So, that was the media story for a long time. And now, just really since adult use has hit the scene in 2016, 2018 or so, certainly here in California, our program took effect in 2018, completely changed the landscape, right? And now it's all about high potency, and it's all about, all that sort of stuff, right? That's and plenty of patients need high potency. I mean, RSO oil is about as high potency as you can get of any cannabis product, right? And a lot of people need that. That go through chemotherapy or go through cancer, go through any number of other conditions, MS, any number of other conditions that you might need that kind of high dose medicine. And so we have to talk about this in a good way. And the conference was a perfect example. It would be very hard for smart approaches to marijuana to sit in that conference and make an argument. It would very, very hard for them. They would be booed out of the room and embarrassed. And so I was real happy with it. What do you think?
I was so impressed with Life is Chill and their outreach to the elderly community. And sitting there having individuals come up at the end of the conference, 80-year-old Korean War and Vietnam War veterans who are sitting there talking about the fact that they take a dozen pills a day and now they're off all of their pills. They're walking, and just seeing these people light up and talk about their experiences that they've had with cannabis in regards to changing their lives for the better and getting off all the stuff. It's like that's isn't the best quality of life. Isn't that what we should be striving for, is the best quality of life, and allowing our elderly patients, medical patients, whatever their ailment may be, to use a medicine that's, I always state that the Drug Enforcement Administration themselves admits the fact in their drugs of abuse that cannabis by ingestion alone has never killed anybody, not a single human being.
That's right.
And it's just one of these things where I'm so happy to see, particularly this here in Arizona, this particular company focusing on the medicinal side. And I could not agree with you more that it started with the medical program. The cannabis in the country was, the medical cannabis programs was started on the backs of the disabled community. And who are they? I shouldn't say we as consumers, but who are they, the lawmakers and all that, to judge and say what we can and can't put on our bodies when we're going to allow alcohol and tobacco and all that type of stuff to just run rampant, but we can't use a natural medicines. I'm 100% on board with you, and the same mentality that like we have to get it back to the patients and we have to get it back to the medicinal side. I don't have a problem with recreational in any way, shape, or form,
No, I
but
don't either.
yeah, but I'd like to focus on the medicinal side.
Yeah, because we're emerging from a century of prohibition
Yeah.
and tremendous stigma.
What?
And so, strategically as a movement, as a community, we have to be smart in how we present this to the world. In a free society, adults should be able to make their own decisions about psychoactives, just like they make their own decisions about firearms and they make their own decisions about alcohol. Um, it should really, in a utopian Andrew DeAngelo's King of the Universe world, um, you know, you would be able to exercise your freedom as an adult. In my little kingdom, you would also learn all about drugs in school,
Right.
and you'd be really well educated, and you'd be able to source these things in a very controlled way, in a way that was pure and clean and good. And you'd have a lot of a lot of treatment available for folks that got into trouble with these things. But people get into trouble with all kinds of stuff. We mentioned social media addictions. We all have that.
Amen. Amen.
We all are strung out on the social media and the smartphones. Everywhere you go, everybody's looking at their devices. Airports, restaurants, cafes, people don't talk to each other anymore. Unless they're on a podcast.
Right.
And then they very quickly watch it, right? And so people get in trouble with all sorts of things, and we don't ban them, and we sometimes we regulate them. Sometimes we might even restrict them, but we don't ban them. And generally in a free society, and I think we want to live in a free society. When you look around the world at societies that aren't free, I don't want to live like the Chinese live underneath
No.
that kind of authoritarian. And yeah, we have our own authoritarian, strains, if you want to compare it to weed here. But we also have a lot of other strains, right? This is a big tent of a republic, and there are democratic forces, there are authoritarian forces, there are libertarian forces, there are anarchists, man. There are hippies, there are communes, there are evangelicals, there are people who talk in tongues when they pray. I mean, there's just all kinds of boats that get floated in all kinds of ways in this country, and that's what being a free society is. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I don't particularly, I'm not particularly interested in becoming a evangelical Christian, but I'm real glad that our country, welcomes that into the fold, and as long as everybody sort of respects each other and doesn't punish each other for whatever it is that they're believing and practicing, and then we have a lot to celebrate.
Amen.
It's the 250th anniversary of our country, and and freedom is one of the bedrock principles that has sustained us all this way, and we want to remember that.
We are the melting pot, and that I think that melting pot is what makes Americans Americans. That's all part of it. For those of my guests who won't know, and I don't know if you recall or not, but my whole shtick, my whole spiel, the blue to green is I used to be a cop.
Yep, I remember.
I was an Arizona State Trooper for over a decade. I was a homicide detective and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
I have been attempting to win over the hearts and minds. I'm a conservative, and I have been attempting to win over the hearts and minds of the conservatives to show. Like I had a bout with PTSD due to a shooting involving in law enforcement that I investigated, and discovered after I got out of law enforcement from a back injury and all that. I discovered cannabis, and the next thing you know, I had like mental health that was improving because it was helping me work through the PTSD.
Mm,
And a large percentage of my followers and my viewers are police officers. And they
mm,
know exactly who I am. They know where I stand. They know what I stand for, and they know that I'm a consumer. And it's one of these things where I'm trying to educate that side of the world in the medicine. And man, I can't wait till you boys and girls get off duty and go home and smoke a joint as opposed to down in two glasses of whiskey. Because I used to be that 2 glass of whiskey guy.
mm-hmm.
I used to be that guy, and it got me into a lot of personal problems, and it wasn't good. And now those things are, it's actually connected me with my feelings and all that. And
Yep.
where
Yep.
I'm going with all of that is the fact that like you've been in this fight for legalization and showing that it's a medicine for how many years? 30, 40 years?
Yep. That's right.
And you have seen this evolution, I'm sure, just over and over and over again. It just like you said, it's the same talking points that get brought up and it's the same things that get said, but there's never any evidence. There's just, just stories. What's what I'm looking for here? Just anecdotal stories from people
Mm-hmm.
about how it harmed them and then harmed us. But like, yeah, but the addiction is the addiction, whether it's food, whether it's sugar, whether it's like you said, the cell phones, whatever it may be. Addiction, the addiction is the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the drug's fault. It's the person's fault for the addiction. I'm not shaming anybody. I'm not saying anything about addiction. I'm just stating that like we all have addictive personalities and get addicted to something.
Mm-hmm.
You know
That's
what I mean?
absolutely right. I mean, if coffee was no longer available tomorrow, much of the country would be in a world of hurt and would be experiencing withdrawal
Yep.
symptoms. And for 99.999% of the people, though, those withdrawal symptoms would not be life threatening.
Right. It
And
would be life
so
threatening to the people around them, but not to the person in them.
well, yeah, right. And so, coffee's considered a relatively safe drug
Right.
because of that. And you can't really OD on coffee. You can get pretty wigged out, but you can't really like cause yourself to OD on it. So, its toxicity profile is pretty safe, right? So, and getting back to the law enforcement community, I am blown away how hard a job that is. Okay. And other than fighting a war overseas, that's like right there with it. Being preventing violent crime, interrupting violent crimes that are happening in the moment that they're happening, responding to violence or all kinds of different crime, right? Even if it's just, crimes that perhaps are not involve violence or assault, but they involve fraud or taking people's life savings away from them or any number of other things, right? And police officers are the way in which we keep order and safety in the community. Extremely stressful job, and it breaks my heart knowing that that community, one, for the most part across the country, don't have access to medical cannabis, and the real tragedy is uh, that law enforcement was used as a pawn in this war against cannabis and forced officers to be in a morally compromising situation that they never asked for, right? Their job is to uphold the law.
Yep.
But if the law is wrong and the law is actually oppressive, not liberating, the law is supposed to liberate us. It's supposed to keep us free. That's what the rule of law does. So you don't get kidnapped by somebody or something, right? Keeps you free. But for that community not to have access and to be put in this situation where they're busting people they know are not really doing that much harm.
Yep.
Um, almost every law enforcement officer I've talked to, even when I was in college 35 years ago, and I'd say, when you're at a concert and there's a bunch of people drinking on this side of the venue and there are a bunch of people smoking weed on this side of the venue, which one would you rather deal with? The drunk people or the stoned people? They all said, give me the stoned people.
Amen.
Because
Amen.
all those people do is hug each other and like not pay attention where they're walking. These people over here getting fist fights. They beat their girlfriends and wives up. They beat each other up. They curse. They're loud, and they don't know where they're walking at the same time. I think it's been that way for as long as I can remember, and just this year alone, 3 million people are going to die from alcohol on this planet. I'm in my 50s, so 150 million people in my lifetime are gone because of that compound, alcohol.
That's
And
socially acceptable drug.
it's everywhere, man. I mean, I was at UC Berkeley meeting with, they have this cannabis historical group at UC Berkeley. And I was up there and we were at a cafe, a coffee shop, literally right across from the campus, 20 feet from the campus, literally 20 feet. All students in there. They serve, of course, a lot of caffeine and coffee in there. They also serve beer and wine. Okay. And there were a few students who were over 21 who were having some beers. Were they getting drunk? No. But they were having a couple beers. And it was fine.
Yep.
And no one blinked an eye, man. And it's right next to the campus, man. I mean, can you imagine if you were inhaling or consuming some I mean, it would be a freak out, right?
It would be the end of the world.
It would be a real big freak out.
Yep.
Those students would probably get kicked out of Berkeley, and all kinds of terrible things would happen to them, right? And even if they were doing a demonstration. And the only thing the alcohol people needed on a regulatory basis, I'm sure the establishment had to have a beer and wine license, but there was this little piece of paper up on the window where you order that said alcohol could cause birth defects. Right. And it was just an 8x10 piece of paper someone printed out on a printer. And that's all that was it. There wasn't like a special package,
Right.
there wasn't any kind of like anything like that. Right. And so I was, we were talking to the Berkeley historians, my brother and I just pointed that out. I was like, because we have the regulations for cannabis in California are insane.
Yeah.
Okay, way worse than Arizona, and our taxes way just horrible. And that's why the legacy market still has 60% of the market, 70% of the market here. Because they've just, the regulatory industrial complex has gotten a hold of it. But law enforcement officers out here, because of that, okay, probably have a very little access. Even if they do have access in a town like San Francisco, maybe, they don't feel comfortable exercising that right. Because they don't want to be seen going in there by their colleagues. They don't want the social stigma associated with it. They don't want to be the pioneers. They don't want to be the first one. And it's just like, it's cool, man. I'll have my whiskeys instead.
Right. I'll destroy my liver and kill myself. But yeah.
Yeah, or so, and I think, with anybody who's a first responder, law enforcement or otherwise, the pandemic had a pretty big impact. And I think that community is still sort of trying to find its normalcy from all of that. And now we have, a lot of other kinds of enforcement actions involving law enforcement, whether it be ICE or others. And everyone needs these mental health tools. Every tool in the toolbox
Amen.
should be available to them. Who knows, man? If officers that work in federal law enforcement, whether it be any federal law enforcement agency, if they had access to the medicine, we might find folks reacting a little bit differently with their firearms. We might have folks reacting a little differently when their lives may not quite be in danger yet, but maybe a little bit, right? And these are all happen. This all happens on a spectrum, right?
Yep. Very much so.
And you're talking about split-second decisions that
Mhm.
law enforcement has to make with how much danger am I in right now? Does it warrant me doing something to defend myself that may be very, very harmful to the other person? And I think that alcohol affects that judgment in one way, and cannabis affects that judgment in another way. And officers are not drinking on the job, nor are they taking cannabis on the job. But still, when it comes to the relaxation after work and the winding down, okay, because cortisol,
Yep.
the stress hormone, gets flooded during your shift. All kinds of mental gymnastics are happening as you try to leverage your training on nonviolent communication or whatever it might be, right? To try to diffuse situations. That all makes your brain just go light up in all these different areas, and a lot of energy is released. Um, a lot more energy than most people experience during an 8-hour job shift, or however long the shift is. And certainly somebody who does something different than law enforcement, not to say they don't have mental stressors, but they probably aren't quite as extreme, as intense on that spectrum, right? And so I hope for all our brothers and sisters in law enforcement that we can work to expand access, to lower stigma, to remove cannabis from the urinalysis lab panels, to encourage. I mean, maybe even encourage, not just like tolerate, but educate, tolerate, and educate. And then peace officers are exercise judgment all the time, and if they're well-educated people on cannabis, they'll make their own judgments, man.
Mhm.
Like any adult in a free society, right? So that's my hope. I know that's your hope too, and you're working very hard to do it. And the I'm glad that you have this voice and this community you've built around this podcast and other things you do, to sort of create a container where folks can learn in a safe and good way.
That I could not have said I agree with every single point that you made. And everything that you said is exactly the way that I feel. And it kills me that I still have coworkers, former coworkers out there, who are going through the most traumatic things in their life, and they can't use the one medicine that actually will help them. And just as you said, I have been extraordinarily fortunate in why I've taken on this role just unofficially as the ambassador to law enforcement. I've also been completely accepted by my local sheriff's office here, and the sheriff, Ross Steeple, who I love dearly and is a great guy. But he's been on the podcast, and we've had these conversations. And it's about opening up the door. It's about having the conversation. It's about not showing stoners aren't dumbasses. You know what I mean? It's about presenting our best foot forward and showing the medicinal needs and all that. So I appreciate the words that you just said, because again, my heart is still out there with those guys. But that's all. But the other thing too, when I started down this path of advocacy, my heart fell in love with the cannabis community as well,
Mhm.
for all of the same reasons. people just trying to fix themselves and to use a natural medication. And again, we're taking out all the outliers here. I'm not talking about the people that just want to get stoned. I'm not talking about, that sort of mentality. I'm talking about those who want to live their lives a better way. And I fell in love with that. And the companies, when it was medicinal, that were really, really focused on patients and focused on, safe, organic medicine. That's what really, really made me want to become an advocate for this plant. And just seeing people who, like we said, the elders that came out to the expo
Hmm.
and were telling us
Yeah.
their stories and all that, like that, whether they're 20 years old or 80 years old, it doesn't matter. Everybody has a need. And if they can use something that's going to actually help them and actually heal them and not just put a band-aid on it or suppress it and cover it up, that's the goal, I think, that what it should be.
Yeah, I agree. And, one of the things I think law enforcement communities and the cannabis community have in common is we are, you're either a cop or not a cop, right? And if you are, you're in this community of people. Same thing, you're either a cannabis user or you're not. And if you are, you know the secret handshake. And just like cops know the secret handshake with each other. And that binds us together, And so we have that in common. And so those of us like yourself that are able to go between both of these worlds, the same kind of camaraderie that you experience, I think, has a common there's a commonality between those
Absolutely.
things. I think there's a commonality between feeling like uh, you're part of something that just a select group of people have chosen to be a part of, and that's very powerful because whether it be sharing information and knowledge that law enforcement officers do about what it is that their world is going through at the moment. Same thing with the cannabis community, right? And so I think that the more we look at these two communities, the more we see how much they have in common,
Agreed.
and that our differences again was really placed on us by power structures we don't have any control over. Politicians like Richard Nixon, right? And that whole debacle with the Controlled Substances Act um, put everybody in this horrible position. If you were a stoner or a medical cannabis patient and you were in that community in 1972, well, your life became very dangerous.
Yep.
And if you were in law enforcement at that time, well, you were expected to go bust these people. And while, we mentioned that cannabis users tend not to shoot guns at cops or, throw punches at cops, they're a little bit less violent, than perhaps those that are drunk or on hard drugs or whatever. Um, it's still you still have to go make these investigations on your fellow citizens. It's hard to do that if you don't feel like they're really doing something bad. And you're told that they are doing something bad, and
Right.
you're told a whole bunch of lies. The same lies were told to cops that were told to kids in schools, that were told to all of us growing up, that we even told ourselves. Okay, there have been times in my life where, I'm in my late 20s or my early 30s and I have a little setback, and there's this little voice inside my head. It's because you smoke weed. It's this little society voice. Man, if you didn't smoke weed, you wouldn't have this setback right now. And it's insidious, man, and not fun. It's not fun. And all that's been placed inside of our consciousness by power, folks that have a lot more power than we do. And especially when it comes to the war on cannabis, that was really rooted in going after black and brown people and anti-war people, hippies, if you
Yep.
will.
Yep.
And the next, John Dean admitted it, and does admit it to this day, that that's what it was about. John Dean was a high level advisor to President Nixon. And so I think it was Dean who said that. It might have been one of the other guys. But in any case, an advisor to the president basically said, yes, Nixon told us to go after make weed Schedule 1 so we could go after black and brown and hippie communities. And that's exactly what happened.
Yep.
Nixon's own commission, the Schaefer Commission, which you're nodding your head, so you might know about this, but a lot of people don't know about the Schaefer Commission. So Nixon, he gets elected in 1968, and he's anti-marijuana, right? Of course. And he appoints a Republican former governor of Pennsylvania, a guy named, I think it was named Robert Schaefer or something. I might be getting his first name wrong, but Schaefer was his last name. And he chaired this 26-member, presidential commission, and we're going to study marijuana, and we're going to show how bad this is for everybody. And he had social scientists and doctors and police officers and jailers and all kinds of different people serving on this. And they spent 2 years studying this, okay, at the taxpayers' expense.
Right, of course.
And then they issue a report, and the report says there's nothing wrong with this plant. It should be decriminalized. What's more dangerous than the plant is the laws against the plant. That's causing more harm. We heard from, 1,200 mothers whose sons and daughter, were in prison, and they did that. They had the record, and they issued this report. And they even did a press conference. Schaefer did a press conference. Nixon buried the report, and the mainstream networks, at that time you had 3 networks, didn't cover the press conference. I think PBS did, which at that time was sort of the equivalent of C-SPAN, and that was it. And then Nixon in 72, just a little bit after that, put cannabis in the Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, when that whole thing went through the Congress to replace the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which had become a little bit, corrupt, but also outdated. So they wanted to rebrand the FBN with the DEA, and that's when the DEA was born. And their job was to enforce the schedules. And they had, a bunch of drugs in Schedule 1. They also had Schedule 2, 3, 4, I think goes down to 5.
Yep.
And then they had their framework for all drugs. And that framework is with us today. I think it's a horrible framework. Even for all the other drugs, I think we've found it's not a very good framework. I'm not sure we'll ever get rid of that framework. But if there was a leader who was as bold and as effective as President Trump, we could get rid of the Controlled Substances Act. It is possible to get rid of it. But it would require that level of will and skill to do it. I just want to get cannabis removed from it. If we could just get cannabis removed from the Controlled Substances Act. I'm not a big fan of Schedule 3 rescheduling. I don't think that serves our community well. Is it a step in a direction that someone might say is right? Sure. But we need to take leaps, not steps, because we're talking about especially now if they want to take alcohol and put it on Schedule 1 with
Amen.
cannabis, and then maybe we can hang.
Maybe. Yeah, there you go. That would be a
Maybe
compromise.
we can hang. But that's alcohol prohibition was already tried once.
It didn't go well. It
It
did not.
went horribly,
Hey,
right?
brought us NASCAR though, so I mean, if you're a NASCAR fan,
Oh, really? Did it?
that's
Oh,
that's
okay.
that's the whole origins of NASCAR was bootleggers.
Wow.
They were modifying their cars to be able to go faster, and then when they would load it up so it wouldn't be squatting, they'd modify the suspension and all that stuff. So that brought us NASCAR.
Wow, cool. Well, uh,
A silver
uh,
lining.
the yeah, but and some people got rich in Prohibition, and
Right.
some really poor communities did well during Prohibition, and there were all kinds of things that happen that one might say are benefits, but generally speaking, we almost became. I guess you couldn't call it a narco state, but we almost became a country run by organized crime. That almost happened.
Yep.
Okay. People don't realize how close this country was to becoming what we refer to now as a narco
Yep.
state. And that's why it had to be repealed, because this country can't descend into that sort of, we have our own classes that are the ones that have to have that power, not a bunch of gangsters. So,
Right. Well, they're gangsters just in a different way.
right,
With
exactly,
a pen, not a
exactly.
gun.
That's right. That's right. And with lots of wealth and power, but and big armies,
Right.
really big armies. But yeah. So those are sort of the origin stories of how all this came to be, and so cannabis should have never been scheduled in the first place. The government's own commission said so, and I've always been blown away where the prohibitionists say, "Oh well, we have to wait. It hasn't been studied enough." And this plant has been studied more than any other plant. There are hundreds, probably thousands of studies showing that this is a efficacious medicine. There was just one that the New York Post did.
Yep.
Do you see that one
I
about
did.
the senior
Yep.
brain
The
and
aging
can't?
patients.
Oh my gosh, that was just off the charts exciting for me to read that. Because, like you said, anecdotally, we've seen this. We've been doing medical cannabis in California since '96. So we've got, 30 years on this thing. And we've just seen this over and over again, where people's mental capacities get better or their mental afflictions are going slower. Because my own mom, her dementia was greatly helped, slowed down, and her quality of life greatly increased by having a few inhalations of cannabis in the evening times when she was sundowning. And so we've known this for a long time anecdotally. Now we're starting to get the studies like the New York Post reported on, and it's very exciting in that regard. And so you have so much science and studies like that show remarkable things that are happening with healing and cannabis in all these different conditions and all these different ways. And so it's so disingenuous
Yep.
for anybody to say that this is especially smart approaches to marijuana. Their propaganda is horrible, horrible lies they tell. Gateway drug, all these theories that have been debunked decades ago by science.
By
Okay,
science.
by science, not by me, by science. And so it's so disingenuous, and because the stigma is still so prevalent in our society. If you see those lies, enough times, you start to believe them.
You do. You absolutely do. And one of the things that looking back, not in the moment when I was still on the job, looking back at the zero, and I mean zero amount of training that is given on actual cannabis, on any drug. There's no training for law enforcement on the drug. It's drug is illegal, drug is bad. Here's signs and symptoms of impairment. Go make arrests. That's it. It's nothing about, like particularly on cannabis with the endocannabinoid system or anything like that. So there's no education, and nor do I think there actually should be for that. But also at the same time, it shouldn't be illegal. And one of the things that you had said, regarding the enforcement against black and brown people, I have often stated that and stick with me on this for just a second, is that I've said that no drug is racist. I'm sorry, pardon me, back up. No law is racist in and of itself in the wording. I will absolutely 100% agree with you that this was started on the back of racism, and it was to go after black and brown people 100%. And it's been detrimental to their communities for so many years, time and time again, over and over. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know what the fix is. I don't know how to change that or anything like that. And then the officers that I do have conversations with, they used to be like how I said I was earlier, like, oh, it's not racist. No, it's rooted 100% in racism. And how we move forward from there, again, getting it descheduled, getting it on getting the federal and the state laws to coincide, those are all just steps in the process. But I don't know. There appears to be this ginormous juxtaposition right now. States are legalizing it, medical programs. How many states have that now? Like 38, I believe. So there's a large percentage. There's a majority of states that have these programs, but I'd love to hear what you've seen in the last 8 months. There was a very concerted effort by Sam and all them, and a very huge conservative push to outlaw for prohibition, and just this, and it's all the same talking points across the country. It's all the same thing. So I don't understand how President Trump wants to, reschedule it, and states are coming on board, but then there's just this huge push. There has to be something behind that specifically. I'd just be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that, as you can imagine. But what we had happen with the intoxicating hemp products, your listeners probably have heard about that whole saga with the Farm Bill and all of that. And what the hemp people sort of proved was that when you remove intoxicating cannabinoids from the Controlled Substances Act, and you allow entrepreneurs to work with the plant, you can create a lot of good in the world. So you had 330,000 jobs created in the hemp sector. You had about $28 billion worth of activity in the hemp sector. You had interstate commerce in the hemp sector. You had wide access in the hemp sector, where Total Wine in some states are carrying the hemp beverages. And then you had the bans happen, right? Because of course, the Farm Bill took people a little bit by storm, particularly in red states. And red states don't generally like to regulate anything. And so you had some actors in the hemp space, making very high potency products, presenting them in ways that perhaps could be appealing to younger people and children. And all those products, 99.9999999% of those products do not listen to the lies. We're age gated.
Right.
All right. When you go into a gas station and you buy a hemp drink, It's age gated.
Right.
Okay. It's not, oh, the kids are getting in gas stations. Well, kids generally don't buy gas. And so they're not going into the gas stations. They're not getting them. And convenience stores generally are age gating these products. Could you find a few instances where that may not have been the case? Sure. In a capitalist society, are there going to be some people trying to get an edge by bending or breaking the rules? Sure. Did that happen in hemp? Yeah, a little bit. Uh, was it widespread and massive and caused a ton of harm in society? No, not at all. And so you had these bans happen at the state level. A lot of those bans were driven by licensed cannabis. Licensed cannabis was really mad at hemp because licensed cannabis had a regulatory framework they had to comply with that was more expensive. They were not removed from the Controlled Substances Act. They were therefore subject to 280E, tax code 280E, which kills them. And they decided to take their anger out on hemp and legislate hemp out of business. And they spent hundreds of millions in lobbying dollars over the last 5 years to do exactly that. And they were successful until even at the federal level, we had a hemp ban get into the ag appropriations bill in November. Doesn't go into effect for a year. All kinds of people are trying to fix it, including me, my brother, and the One Plant Alliance. And it's not just the hemp ban we're trying to fix. We're trying to remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act altogether. All cannabis. It's one plant. And this idea that, well, hemp is one thing, and it's just crazy, right? It's same plant. And so the licensed people got mad at the hemp and they went after him. And then hemp counterattacked, man. Hemp is not just going to sit there and be attacked and legislate out of business. They hired their own lobbyists and they started, like the hemp guys in Maryland sued the state of Maryland, said, you're creating a monopoly with these licenses. They lost that case. And then it backfired because the court said, oh, by the way, not only is our licensing not a monopoly and it's allowed, all your products are illegal. And so it backfired massively on them. But in other states, we've seen, battles in Florida. We've seen battles in Texas. We've seen battles just about everywhere regarding hemp and licensed cannabis. And smart approaches to marijuana has watched that battles, has watched the talking points. Licensed marijuana basically said, you're trying to poison our children with this hemp. Sam's making the same argument on license right now. License basically said, you're appealing to children with your marketing. Sam is accused license of the same thing. Not real hard when one of the biggest brands in license is called Cookies.
That's
it's not real hard, not like a hugely big argument to make, right? And so, I love Burner. I love, what they've built, and, kudos for them for building such a big business. But it's a problem.
It is.
Okay. It is a problem. And for us not to acknowledge that is not smart, because Sam is acknowledging it. Okay. And there are a whole bunch of mainstream people out there who were voting with us just a few years ago that are starting to look at this propaganda. They have kids. They don't have a relationship with the plant. They could give two F's about it.
Right.
They care about their kids. And then they start to see, oh, wow, these hemp guys are doing this stuff with the kids. And, oh, wow, and there's these Cookies people. And, oh, why am I for this?
Right.
Hold on, I'm not for this. This is not what I'm for. I'm against this, man. And it's not hard to flip these arguments and these folks when we're making them for Sam. We're making the argument we're test casing their they're talking points for them, man. I just wrote about this in Forbes too, just this week. And and Sam is very well funded, as I mentioned earlier, and they're
By
going to keep.
who?
Well, they're a 501c4, so we don't know.
Gotcha. Well, yeah.
Okay, they're not a 501c3, which is a transparent nonprofit where you have to reveal all your funders, like Last Prisoner Project, another organization I started. They're 501c4, and you don't have to. I suspect the Adelson family's behind quite a bit of it. The Adelson is a gambling family. They out of Las Vegas. The guy named Sheldon Adelson, who died a couple years ago, but he was big drug warrior. And his wife now, his widow now, is kind of picking up where he left off. And they've given a lot of money to Republicans and right-wing causes and the Trump administration and people running under that platform. And that's who they are. And so I suspect they have some, if not most of that 23 million, but I'm sure there's other folks in there.
Sure.
Mitch McConnell, the former majority leader in the Senate, he led the charge on the hemp ban that happened in November. And he was actually one of the architects of the Farm Bill that made the whole thing happen. And he knew what was going to happen. And then when, a little bit of heat started coming, he started talking about unintended consequences and loopholes. But come on, man, you're a lawyer and you've been Senate Majority Leader for 40 years. You don't know how to write a bill without a loophole in it? Come on, guys, let's start telling the truth here. It's just like all politicians, when they realize they've turned down the wrong road, they real quickly, make a U-turn and go back the other way. And that never happened. I didn't go down that road. Never happened. So that's just on the hemp side, right? We're starting to see prohibition. Now we're starting to see on the license side, Sam's doing these things on the license side. Even if they lose, they'll be back again.
Oh yeah. The fight for prohibition will never ever go away.
Well, not in our lifetimes, I don't think. I really wanted to believe it would in my lifetime. I do believe it can go away forever and ever. But a lot of, I also thought, we'll never have measles again. We'll never have polio again. And now that shit's coming back because people don't want to get vaccinated. So, you're right. The human being is always in a state of especially with things that involve stigma and power and money and medicine and all these other complicated factors that our issue is sort of all wrapped in. People have strong feelings, and the pendulum's going to swing back and forth between freedom and oppression, depending on who's in power. And it's just like, it's like racism. When I was a little kid, there was a lot of racism, and I was very idealistic, and I figured by the time I'm the age I am now, we'll be done with that. We won't be dealing with that anymore. And I was wrong. And that's one that's probably going to be around for quite some time. So, and it's a shame, because those of us who, cannabis taught me a lot about equality, right? And not just between the races, but between the sexes and between queer folks and straight folks and just diverse populations all getting along. All right, the cannabis plant taught me that that's important, number one, and number two, helps facilitate that, in my opinion. Okay,
100%.
Yeah, And like I saw this great video these folks in Washington made where they took a rabbi and a priest and a stoner. And the rabbi and the priest had never smoked weed before. And the stoner, of course, was a stoner. So they all took bong hits. And then the rabbi and the priest talked about how they were feeling, right? And they were having like profound experiences, and they were all this stuff was happening to them with respect to spirituality and the interconnectedness of life, and their own they were feeling euphoric, and they were feeling good, right? And then you had the stoner who was very used to that, and they were all sharing it together, and they were understanding each other,
Yeah.
because the stoner was an atheist, and the stoner was able to get closer to not being an atheist anymore. And the religious guys were being closer to becoming a stoner than they had ever been before, because in that particular moment they were stoners, and it was really fun to watch, because you saw these folks that would not normally converge in that way, and if they would normally have a conversation like that, it would probably be more contentious and
Oh, sure.
less curious, right? And less like inquisitive of like, and it was funny because um they would make jokes with each other, right? They would make jokes with each other, and it was just it was a really it really illustrated for me. I know there's people in places like the Middle East that are trying to get using cannabis and also using psilocybin to get um, Jewish people and Muslim people in Gaza to to come together and to experience peace together, and using these sacraments as a way of facilitating that. And I think that's the kind of thing that'll probably work better than perhaps other approaches to how to make peace there. So I do believe this is not just theoretical. It when you actually share this medicine with others, you increase, peace and understanding. You might not get to love, but you definitely help facilitate peace and understanding. I think it's always. Are there folks that take, cannabis and do something that's not peace and not understanding?
Sure.
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 Sure, of course. But they're probably also
Right.
having a,
There's other
yeah,
things to it.
there might be some other things in there too.
But I just could only go off of my own example in this regard. And when I got into the cannabis community, and I'm a board member for Arizona Normal as well. So when I took the step and wanted to become an advocate, I was, totally alone, but also open in what my previous career was and who I am. I've never ever wanted to shy away from things. And I like the very first when I started coming around on things, it was kind of one of those things where it's like, am I going to be accepted or not? And without question, you smoke a joint with somebody, you're friends for life.
Hmm.
You're having a shared common experience.
Hmm.
Your defenses are coming down. You're opening communication. You're opening your thought process. You're opening up your mind to other ideas. Just as you stated, it's exactly what it did, and it's been an eye opening. It's definitely opened up my eyes personally to other afflictions that people are dealing with, and other things that are going on in their lives. And it's definitely brought me closer together with that community, and also my my law enforcement friends. You know, it's actually brought me closer to them. It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, hey, buddy, love you. And they're like, oh man,
Yeah.
you're smoking. I'm like, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
But it brings that community together. It brings that closeness together. So, you know, it's
Uh,
definitely something that I've appreciated.
Sorry, I had to plug in my laptop there.
Yeah.
No, man, I think it's great. This is you change the world one joint at a time sometimes, or one gummy at a time, or one tincture at a time, or one CBD at a time. And it took decades and decades and generations of generations during Prohibition, and it's going to take probably something similar for reform to really begin to eradicate the stigma. I would like to think 100 years from now, or if you want to take Bobby Weir from the Grateful Dead's philosophy and go out 300 years, okay, because he was imagining what is the Grateful Dead music and scene going to be like 300 years from now, right? And I hope 300 years from now, humanity looks back at prohibition of cannabis and just shakes its head and, wow, those people sure were misguided.
Right.
It's kind of like when, you know, there were times where if you were sick, they'd put leeches on you, or they'd make you bleed. You'd bleed. You had too much blood, or you had too much. And we look back at it now, just like, what were those people thinking, right? And I hope that's how it is, because if we could just follow the not just the science, but the cultural medicinal history of cannabis and human history, we will make this a central part of our lives, this plant, not just what we consume, but like all this stuff you see, this building I'm in, the floor, the carpeting, everything could be made out of hemp. A good chunk of this computer I'm working on right now could be made out of hemp.
Yeah. Cool.
They're starting to put hemp into like electronic because it can conduct heat so well and keep things cool. It's this plant that it's just one of these plants that nature evolved that is absolutely so useful in so many ways. And because sweetgrass is kind of like this too. It evolved with human beings. Sweetgrass is a Native American, well, it's a plant that's been around for a long time. Native Americans use it for weaving baskets and ceremonies and gifts to each other and all kinds of different things. And sweetgrass grows better when it's cultivated by humans than it does in the wild. In the wild, it doesn't grow as good as it does when humans interact with it. And cannabis has obviously we've been interacting with it for a long time. How else did we get an endocannabinoid system? The external and the internal of this plant has been actualized within our organism, and so it's pretty clear that we do better when we're close to cannabis, and cannabis does better when it's close to humans. If the goal of any plant is to propagate itself as widely as possible, cannabis has done probably a better job than any other plant. You can think of a few food crops like wheat and corn, and
Right.
maybe that might have done as good as cannabis, but a lot of places you can grow corn, you can't grow wheat, or a lot of places you can grow you can't grow either one of those things, but you can grow cannabis in all those places. So I think more broadly, we just have to get back to having stronger relationships with nature and all things that happen in nature, including plants. And we just, if you ask, most human beings can identify more corporate logos than they can name plants. And that's really sad, man.
It is.
I try to learn, like, what are the plants in my garden? What are they named? And learn about them a little bit. But I'm by no means an encyclopedia of that sort of thing. But I'm sad that I didn't learn that in school, and I'm sad that I feel so cut off from that. And even when I'm in a really wild natural place, I'll sometimes feel overwhelmed and uncomfortable because it's so wild and it's so off the grid. And I shouldn't feel that way.
We should be comfortable in nature.
We
We
should
should
be
be out in
comfortable.
nature all the time.
Yeah, we should be comfortable, at least at bare minimum comfortable, and not afraid. If there's a jaguar coming, well, that is time to be, afraid. But, we've developed pretty good mechanisms to deal with that through evolution. But yeah, man, we've gone through a few little tangents here, but the world of cannabis is like that.
It is. It is. And I wanted to talk about two things. One, I was researching and all that because obviously I knew who you were, but I did not comprehend that you were one of the founders of the Last Prisoner Project. I was very lucky and fortunate to have a Last Prisoner Project associate member, whatever, on my podcast. She was the representative out here in Arizona. Her name was Mariah, and it was about a year or so ago that I had her on. So we got to talk about the Last Prisoner Project, and it just amazes me that still needs to be a thing because there's still people incarcerated for something that I have in this room.
Yeah, it's real sad that that's the case, and it's just the criminal justice system is in many ways a criminally injustice system. And, we've at Last Prisoner Project and just on my own, since I left that organization, we all need to be talking about retroactive release. Okay, that's what the term is called. And it basically means as soon as a law passes that legalizes weed, everybody gets out of jail. Like that day.
Agreed.
Not like a year, not after some procedures done. No, that day. And that's called retroactive release. We don't have retroactive release in a single state, and we certainly don't have retroactive release at the federal level because we're still Schedule 1 there. And without that, people that have already been convicted and have exhausted all their appeals, what are they going to do? What are they going to do?
They're going to sit in prison.
They're going to sit in prison, or they get a commutation from a governor, or they get pardoned by the president. That's it.
Yeah.
So, LPP, a lot of what LPP does is file clemency petitions on behalf of those prisoners that have exhausted all their appeals. It takes years to do that. It's a grind. A lot of the budget for Last Prisoner Project goes to a lot of these attorneys that work at a much reduced rate, but still have to, pay the bills.
Right.
And we get pro bono. I mean, when I was still there a few years ago, we were getting quite a bit of pro bono legal work done too, but a good chunk of the budget went for this because it's not just the lawyers. There's a whole software system involved with tracking these things, and each stage of the clemency petition and where all the documents live and the court reports and the arrest reports and all the stuff you need, because they make you like resubmit that every step of the way.
Interesting.
And it's a very cumbersome process. And every time you go in front of the parole board or the, clemency board, just this whole thing has to happen. And, but LPP has been able to slowly start releasing folks in this way. And then you got other groups now like Freedom Grow and Mission Green, I think they're called. And they're doing some great work releasing prisoners or getting prisoners money in their accounts while they're serving their time.
Okay.
To make life a little bit easier for them on the inside. Now, of course, in federal and state prisons, they put a cap on how much you're allowed to have in your commissary every month, which is just insane. You can only have 3 Snicker bars a month, not 4, because you are a criminal.
Right.
And meanwhile, we'll serve you this slop that, you know, has no nutritional value and tastes horrible, because you are a criminal.
Right.
And so all that work with social justice and prisoners continues. You know, I hope your listeners will find a way to volunteer or plug in. Last Prisoner Project, every Christmas holiday season, there's a letter writing drive. I think all year round on the website, you can write a letter to a prisoner. Starting a pen pal with a prisoner. And I'll just mention one, Edwin Rubis. Edwin Rubis is the longest serving cannabis prisoner, 27 years right now, federal prison. He's got an Instagram account, Free Edwin Rubis. If you leave him a message, he'll get it. And I just talked to him on the phone a week or so ago. And strong man, educated himself in prisons, become a totally different human being in prison. I think he has a master's degree, and he's teaching other prisoners. He's started multiple groups in prison that empower people to fight their legal case or take better care of themselves or their families on the outside, and just a wonderful human being. And 27 years, right? And so a whole bunch of folks are trying to get him home now, and he's got a 40-year sentence.
What state is he in?
Well, they move him around a lot.
Sure.
They move him around a lot, but I think he got busted. It was either California, it might have been like Nebraska or one of these transport states. I think he got nailed transporting. I have so many prisoners with so many.
Sure.
I sometimes mix them up, but he got, you know, you don't get 40 years unless you have a pretty big load of cannabis, or they've been watching you for a long time and they've just documented, you know, a whole bunch of
Stack the charges.
Yeah, they've just stacked a lot of things. Sometimes people get that if they had priors, that's their third strike or whatever.
Or had a gun.
Right, or had a gun that they didn't use. But you just talk to Edwin you only get 15 minutes when you call from prison, but you just talk to him and you realize this is someone who does not belong in prison. And you know, people have not been able to get him out, and folks have been working very, very hard to get him out. And it's just one of these cases that's been really hard to get over the finish line. So, you know, folks, and he's a great guy to be a pen pal with, and he's a great guy to talk to on the phone and learn about these things. And you know, when you correspond with a prisoner, you become very close to the person, and you know, good. And when they get out, they will remember.
I'm sure.
You will have a special bond with them for life. And you know, I have a young man named Christian Reichert, and he did, I think, 8 or 9 years for bogus charges. Bogus. He was not even in the state when the bust went down. And of course, you know, conspiracy, and the people rolled on him, and all this other stuff. But all he did was rent a house, a safe house that somebody used for a load.
They get him in RICO? Probably.
They got him on a conspiracy, and what happened was the people he was working with were really bad dudes, and they got into a high-speed chase with law enforcement. and they shot at the law enforcement
That's a problem.
vehicle, right? So they had no mercy on all of them in the conspiracy, including Christian. They're just like, throw the book at him.
Yeah.
And he had like 25 years, just a crazy sentence. Finally was able to get him out. And now he's, trying to rebuild his life. He's in the Midwest. I think he's in Missouri, St. Louis area. And, he desperately wants to work in the cannabis industry, but he's laying drywall right now because he's still under probation. And I think he probably could work in the legal industry there if he could find the right opportunity. But those are hard to come by when you're even in our industry. And so, but I really enjoyed being his pen pal for a number of years, and I enjoy being connected with him. And it's a really special bond and friendship that you get with people. So, like, if anybody out there is lonely, start a pen pal with a cannabis prisoner, and you won't be lonely anymore.
And I'll put Last Prisoners Project, all their information in here as well for
Great.
the notes and all that.
Yeah, great.
But it just it's awesome that there is still organizations out there that did not forget about these people, even though the justice system has forgotten about these people. The cops that put the handcuffs on them have forgotten about these people, but luckily society as a whole has not. So
it's really our community that's doing it.
Yeah.
Steve and I think there might have been one other group when we started, but there weren't many when we started LPP. Then LPP became a pretty big organization, and then other folks decided to do their own, and the more the merrier, right? And yeah, we cannot leave, especially when you've got very large MSOs and other companies right now that are cultivating, transporting, and distributing far more cannabis than Edwin Rubis or Christian Reichart ever could have. Right. And none of those folks are in prison. And in fact, the executives have very fat stock option packages. And as soon as their 280E liabilities get taken care of, they're all going to be millionaires many times over. And those folks are the privileged among us, and then there's the prisoners among us, and both groups are doing the exact same thing.
Yep.
And so so it's important for our community to step up and try to right that wrong.
Amen. I wanted to ask you also about the One Plant Alliance.
Yes. Well,
give us a description as to what that is.
The One Plant Alliance is trying to solve this conflict between licensed cannabis and hemp that we talked about a few moments ago. And that's why it's called One Plant Alliance. And we have 4 basic principles. One is to remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. The other is to make sure that we call them 3 golden pillars of regulation, are enacted. 1 is age gating, 2 is lab testing, and 3 is accurate labeling. What we learned from the hemp industry is they needed a little bit more regulation over there, but not a lot more. And what we've learned with licensed cannabis, they need a lot less regulation over there, right? So let's not try to get hemp to be as regulated as licensed. That would just empower the legacy market. Let's get license down closer to hemp, and let's get hemp a little bit closer to license. And when you talk about the quote unquote bad actors in hemp that are flooding the children with high potency products, well, if there's a lab test, that potency gets caught by the lab test. If there's accurate labeling, they can't lie about how potent something is. I mean, I've seen examples of potency that just weren't possible.
Right.
You can't, if a chocolate bar weighs 3 grams, it can't have 15,000 milligrams. It can't have the math. It just can't. And so accurate labeling, I think, is really, really important because people will say anything about anything to make a buck. And that's true in all industries. And so, the alcohol people these are the regulations they have to live under. If you buy any alcohol product, the labels are the same. And they're accurate. And you know what? Alcohol actually has lab testing also. And a lot of people don't realize the lab test is paid for by the taxpayer.
Really?
It is paid for by the taxpayer. And there's a regulatory body, federal regulatory body called TTB. I think it's a Tobacco Taxation Bureau, I think is what it stands for. Alcohol's in there and tobacco's in there. They do both. And yeah, they lab test the alcohol and tobacco randomly. They're random tests, not every batch like we have to go through. They pull something off the shelf at a liquor store or grocery store and they send it to the lab. And if it doesn't meet certain specs, that company's going to hear from them.
Right.
And those products are going to get recalled. You don't hear about that often because when you're talking about fermented products, complying with the lab test is a lot easier than when you're talking about a natural plant-like compound. These are all fermented products. The fermentation process kills a lot of the nasties off, just its own process, right? But like we're in the wine country up here, sulfites are sprayed heavily on the wine. You'll see a little thing on your wine label. This contains sulfites. Sulfites, a lot of people have allergies and adverse reactions to sulfites. And sulfites are used to kill mold in weed gardens, not just wine. But the amount of sulfites they use is never revealed.
Right.
And there's no test for it. You can't have more than X amount of sulfites in the wine. So it just says this has sulfites in it. It doesn't say this is how much sulfites is in here. It just says this has sulfites in it. So if you're sensitive to sulfites, you're going to find a natural wine that doesn't use any sulfites. And it's really on the consumer to figure all this stuff out, right? It's not on the entrepreneur. It's not on the company, right? And so and these are much more harmful substances than cannabis will ever be. And so I think that One Plant Alliance seeks to have a very simple regulatory framework on the federal level that removes cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. Now, we feel like a lot of people we've talked to have said, wow, man, that's great, but it's not realistic. You're never going to be able to do that. You got to take little steps. You got to do reschedule first, and then maybe we get to deschedule. Or you got to agree to pay for the lab test yourself, and maybe you'll get something later on. But I kind of reject that argument. I think we're never going to get the legalization that we truly envision unless we actually envision it.
Right.
And we can't confuse strategic compromises with our ultimate goal. And we've done that a lot. And it's not our fault that the people that are passing these laws and regulations have no relationship to the plant whatsoever and could give two F's about the plant. The plant doesn't vote and the plant doesn't give them any campaign contributions, so they don't really care about it. and none of them have a personal relationship with the plant. They're all regulating something that they have no relationship with. It's kind of like asking a sommelier who doesn't drink wine to recommend a bottle of wine. They will not be able to do it. They will not be able to do it, and we've seen the same thing with this. So we have to put our stake in the ground the way we want it to be, and you know, my brother and Amber and I, the three co-founders of One Plant Alliance, we didn't see anybody doing that. We saw the hemp guys going, oh, well, let's just keep hemp the way it is, but we don't really care about license. And we saw the license people saying, oh, we just want Schedule 3, so 280E will go away, and we actually want to ban hemp. But we didn't really have anybody saying, well, how should it be for everybody? And we felt like that was a very important voice to have in the room, especially when prohibition is resurging right now with the hemp ban and now these initiatives in Arizona, Massachusetts, and soon to be Maine. And so that's what we did. And, you know, the moment has changed a lot for One Plant Alliance since Schedule 3 dropped. We started the organization, you know, right when the state bans were starting to happen about a year ago. And then as the federal bans got closer, we decided to formally launch the organization. People go to our website, oneplantalliance.org, and read our policy paper. You can sign our pledge. We're asking people to sign the pledge first. And all that obligates you to is, I agree with the policy paper. I agree that this is the right framework. We're not even going to release the pledges publicly until we get a whole bunch of them. And then we'll let everybody know who signed them. Hey, look, we've got 300 or 400 of these from all kinds of different folks, licensed hemp, legacy even.
Gotcha.
And then we have hopefully we have announcement, maybe a press conference, and we've got a whole bunch of people sitting at the table up there that are united, okay, and are throwing it down. This is what we want to see happen. And then we can start to get closer to what legalization ought to look like.
Okay.
In a free society, with a compound that is a medicine, that's probably the safest psychoactive compound on earth, that has to be taken in context with all the other psychoactives that are widely available, particularly alcohol and tobacco, and make good decisions, right? And with the 3 golden pillars, it's going to be very hard for kids to get a hold of these products. It's going to be very hard for entrepreneurs to lie about what's in them. And it's going to be impossible for anybody to beat the lab test, because the lab is going to be, in our vision, paid for by the taxpayer.
Right.
So there is no company lab, there is no lab to bribe.
Which, unfortunately, you know as well as I do, does happen in the cannabis community, unfortunately.
All over the place.
Yeah.
All over the place. They didn't regulate the labs. Well, like, how dumb was that? You're going to regulate everything else. You're going to put metric and a seed to sale tracking, which doesn't work. I call it seed to sale diversion software, because it's basically made diversion legal here in California, and all these other things you're going to, and they're completely not needed, right? None of this stuff is needed for if you don't need. Could you imagine trying to do a hop to can of beer tracking system? It would be impossible, just like it is for weed. It's impossible. No one would even Think about doing that, man.
Right, right,
Or same thing with fossil fuels. I mean,
right.
would you do that with fossil fuels? No, we don't have to, because it's all dirty, nasty stuff, and so we don't have to test it. And I think fossil fuels probably are tested for, like what kind of fuel it is
Sure.
and what kind of octane it is and that sort of thing. But so like we need to stop the insanity here. And we need to put these politicians in their place a little bit and say,
I
look,
agree.
you don't have a relationship with the plant. You're completely unqualified to do this.
I, I've always been curious about that as politicians go. If you have a politician that's writing a law on building bridges, well, do they just do it without getting a bridge builder and talk to them?
Right.
No, they go and talk to the professional. But when it comes to cannabis policy, they just seem to do whatever the money tells them to do. Now, we understand that money rules politics. We know that. But at the same time, I very much do believe in government of formed by the people. And I agree 100% with you that we got to put our foot down and say, this is what we want. And we're not compromising. I don't
Yeah,
know.
or yeah, and look, we will have to compromise.
Sure, sure.
But we don't start with the compromise.
Amen.
We start with it's negotiation 101, man. You start read The Art of the Deal. You start with what you want, and then if your negotiation requires you to compromise a little bit, like we might have to have a potency cap, per serving potency cap. I don't think we should, because again, in a free society, adults,
Right.
if they know that that is 100 milligram edible, they ought to be free to able to buy it. Okay, as long as they know what that means.
Right.
Okay, for them. And but we might have to make that compromise, as an example.
If it gets descheduled with potency requirements or caps, okay, maybe we can talk here.
Yeah, that's right. And as long as the potency caps aren't insane, like 1/2 of 1 milligram, I mean, that's not going to do anything for anybody, right? But if they're at 5 milligrams, 10, right now in California, they're 5 and 10 milligrams per serving. And I think the maximum amount of servings in a container is 10, so it's 100. And they have to be individual servings. So you can get a pack of gummies with 10 milligrams or 25 milligrams in it, and there's your purchase. And we had to make those compromises,
Sure.
and at
Sure.
the state level, and it's something that anybody who has to deal with public health or whatever is probably going to feel strongly about. So, but I don't want to lead with that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I want to compromise with that. And then, okay, what are you going to give us, in the negotiation process? Oh, you're going to give us descheduling. Great. Are you going to give us retroactive release?
Probably not, but we can work on that.
Well, I, at the federal level, I think that's something we can get. Okay. I think it is something we can get. At least on federal prison. Like Nancy Mace has a bill called the States Act, and in the States Act, which is basically kicks legalization to the states.
Okay.
It removes cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, and it kicks everything else to the states. But she has retroactive release in there for federal prisoners. Okay, and is Nancy Mace my favorite elected official in the world? No, but did she get that right? Absolutely, man, and kudos to her. I had her on my panel at South by Southwest a few years ago, 2023, and I was so impressed that when I pressed her on, I was like, do you have retroactive release in your state's act? And she said, yes, I do, right away. And then I had a Democratic House member on there who was pushing the MORE Act. And I said, do you have retroactive release in the MORE Act? And wouldn't answer the question.
Interesting.
You know why? They don't.
They don't have it.
They don't have it. They have expungement, but they do not have retroactive release. Why? Because those folks felt like they had to compromise with law enforcement and make sure that was not in there. Nancy Mace, on the other hand, didn't really care about that because she's a military veteran, and she's already got a lot of credibility with vets and law enforcement communities, so she could take a little bit of a risk there, a lot more than a House member from Oregon can. And this is kind of the horse trading that happens at the federal level when a law becomes a bill, or a bill tries to become a law. So One Plan Alliance is really about staking our ground right now. It's a very fluid political situation with Schedule 3, the hemp ban, the moratorium on the hemp ban, and all the rest of it, and the SAM initiatives, and just all the rest of it. Very fluid political moment. So our original strategic vision for how we were going to implement One Plan Alliance, should we get funded, is shifting a little bit, because that was before Schedule 3 dropped.
Sure.
And Schedule 3 has made it a little harder for us to talk to licensed cannabis companies and get them on board with One Plan Alliance, because Schedule 3, at least they perceive Schedule 3, or some of them perceive Schedule 3 helps them with their moats that they've built. We have some work to do to persuade those folks that it's in their best interest to support One Plan Alliance and the 3 golden pillars. And also with the hemp guys, we have some work to do there to get them to not be so mad at the licensed folks. We just I call it the peace. We're sort of the peace treaty. Okay. We're the peace treaty framework.
You're the Geneva Conventions between hemp and cannabis.
Yeah, we're like the Geneva Convention between hemp and cannabis. And look, both sides, to get our framework, is going to have to make sacrifices.
Right.
Licensed cannabis is going to have to give up some of their exclusivity, and hemp is going to have a whole bunch of people to compete with that know how to build these supply chains and deploy them pretty good.
There's the capitalism, though. Let the best company win.
Yes, that's what the One Plan Alliance framework does. We also lower barriers to entry for people of color. So instead of having these legislative social equity programs that haven't worked real good, and many places don't work at all, and some places don't work very good, you make it a lot cheaper to get in. If you already have an existing business, you can sell weed in it. And as long as you can pass the lab test and make the label accurate, you're in. You're in the game. And so I do think it levels the playing field. You're right. Capitalism has a way of hacking these things sooner or later. But I do think, and those of us that do have a relationship with the plant, I think we can compete now, because we don't have these artificial moats and barriers to entry standing in the way of something we already know how to do, right? And so I think I think it really does level the playing field. What something does in theory and what it does in practice is sometimes two different things. But what we saw in the hemp sector is, I know some pretty small farms out here in California that got a hemp license, and they're in the industry. And they were not able, they had to give up their cultivation licensed in the license program because they couldn't afford it. Or they couldn't compete with the big, huge farms like Glass House we have out here, or Stizzy, or people like that. And so they're providing for their households with hemp, and they're not big giant companies. A lot of small businesses are doing stuff in hemp. A lot more small businesses are doing stuff in hemp than are doing stuff in licensed. And so that should be a lesson to everybody. And it's a good thing. We need to bring back small businesses in this country.
Amen.
In a serious way, and start enforcing these antitrust laws a little bit better, and empower. Americans are inherently entrepreneurial. It's kind of in our DNA.
It is.
Like nowhere else on earth is it. It's so, maybe it's just this new frontier or whatever, but it's just in our DNA, and it's not. It doesn't feel right to me. It's never felt right to me to see that spirit squashed so we can have, big box retail and, one company owning not just their own giant industry, but like a whole bunch of other industries too. I mean,
everything adjacent to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon owns the Washington Post. I mean, like that's like, to me, that's a trust. That's a trust that needs to be broken up. Should have never been able to do that in the first place. Right. And it would be better for America if Washington Post was still owned by a private family.
I agree.
Okay. Because the only obligation they had was to journalism and journalistic principles. They didn't have they didn't have,
right,
products. They didn't have, I mean, well, they had to make money, and they did, and did very well for themselves. And, I mean, oversimplifying. I mean, Lord knows the Washington Post had its own corrupt structures to it before, but it also did its job as a member of the press. And in our country, the press is designed to keep elected officials accountable. One institution that we have to keep elected officials accountable, and it's very important. If you're doing a lot of business with the government and you own these media companies, it's same. It's
everything
same with,
you're doing is good.
Yeah,
that's what they'll say.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to One Plant Alliance, that's what we're all about right now. That's what we're working on right now, and I think. I certainly hope the moratorium gets extended. I certainly hope Schedule 3 gets fast-tracked. All that reform, I'm not against it. I just don't think it's where we should be putting our stake in the ground right now. And so I hope your listeners will check out our website and sign the pledge. You can sign the pledge as an individual. You don't have to be part of a company. And hope we can build some momentum for One Plant Alliance.
Everything that you have said in this podcast interaction has been completely moderate, and you hear the rhetoric from the conservatives and from the right wing side. I'm just using general terms right here, not trying to label anybody. And you hear like, oh, people just want, all this stuff. And it's like, if there's any cannabis activist in the world who is, in the weeds of all the stuff, your brother and all that stuff, it's like everything that has come out of your mouth has been nothing but moderate, nothing but let's stop imposing our will on other people and give people the freedom of choice. Let's gatekeep it. Let's the gate or age keep it, or what did you get? Age gate it.
Age gate it. Yeah.
I like that term very much. Let's test it. Let's regulate it. Let's age gate it. Let's get medicine into the hands of the Americans that who want it, and let's let freedom reign. That's pretty much the gist of it.
I mean, I've always felt like our position on all this stuff is very moderate.
Yeah.
I've been called a radical my whole life, but it seems like common sense to me.
Very much common sense.
And now I have a relationship with the plant. If I didn't have a relationship with the plant and I wanted to really study the science of the plant, I would come to the same conclusion. And so, yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're hearing it that way. I hope everyone's hearing it that way. And, our political system is contentious, more as contentious as it's ever been in my life. And we just have to keep showing up, keeping having conversations like this. We're going to change hearts one heart at a time. And, hopefully we got a few on this podcast.
We will. And again, like I said, I am lucky enough to have earned the trust of the law enforcement community and of the stoner community. And I have prided myself on bringing quality people on who can explain things in a way that, again, if people have radical ideas, okay, let's talk about it. I want to hear the radical idea. Maybe I will or will not agree with it, but at the same time, let's hear it. But again, when we're trying to win hearts and minds and trying to bring medicine to people, like, I believe that this is the appropriate approach in my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, AJ, you're providing great service, and I'm so pleased to see folks like you building bridges between these communities. We desperately need it. We need to rebuild our trust with each other and our caring for each other. There's, it's not just with the cannabis community, but there's increasingly divisions between law enforcement and citizens, and a lot of that has been imposed from above, like we were talking about with cannabis laws. But it's important that folks feel like they're on the same team here. We're all Americans, trying to keep our country safe, trying to keep our kids safe, trying to keep our streets safe. But also fun and adventurous, and allow people to have a good time and heal themselves in ways that are not hard to keep safe, and but also enhance people's qualities of life. So I'm really very impressed with what you're doing here, building these bridges. So thank you for doing that.
No. Thank you. Thank you for this time. And again, like, there's so much trauma in this world and in this country, especially now with everything that's coming out. Like, this is just another step to help heal people. And you have built a life and a legacy of speaking for this plant, and you've known all along. You know what I mean? And so now it's to bring to light to those people that are either A, not in the light, or B, resistant to it. But I cannot thank you enough. You've given me almost 2 hours of your time, minus the technical difficulties in the beginning.
Yeah. No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
I am very grateful for this time and this opportunity to talk to you. First of all, you're a fascinating individual,
Thanks.
and you clearly, your heart is for the people. You have a civil servant heart. And it's just amazing to see. And I can't thank you enough for this time. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I appreciate the opportunity to meet you, talk with you, have correspondence with you, and share this message with my followers and all that. And I thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome. And I hope to come to more events in Arizona and see you then.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We got another one coming up in October. So, and I'll just do a little caveat here real quick that this is like the first time I'm announcing it unofficially. I did finally, that company, Life is Chill. is now an official sponsor of my podcast. So this is the official thing of it. So, but
Great.
yeah. So, and again, it's all about the patience. It's all about the patience.
Great company, great products, great leaders, all doing the right thing, their heart in the right place. You can't go wrong with Life is Chill. I'll say that.
There you go. There's our little spiel for it. But Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the information and all that. And I look forward to having more correspondence with you here soon.
Me too, AJ. Take care.
Thanks, man. Have a good one.